Yo, JD here, and as you can see, we are an F125, and for today's video, I thought this would be hopefully a very useful one. So if you did like this video, make sure you do give it a like. Lets me know you want to see more content of this, and it's actually helped you out as well. Today, we're actually going to go through every single part of the setup configuration that you can do, so all the different components going from the aero to the tire pressures. I will be making a separate video on how I actually create good setups, and mainly from like a TT to then using it online. So for 5 lappers, 50% league races, because I do think you have to actually amend quite a few things in terms of the setup, also your driving style as well. But those will be some separate videos, otherwise this will probably be like an hour long. But for today, I think we're just going to go through. I'm going to explain it as simply as I can, because I know for a lot of people, including myself, when you go into racing games that you might not have played before, for me it's iRacing, Assetto Corsa, you look at all the setup options, it can be pretty overwhelming at times if you haven't got experience in the game and you don't understand how the game mechanics work. So I'm going to try and simplify this for you as much as possible. I'll be breaking this into sections as well. Any questions you have, just put down in the comments, I'll do my best to answer them. But also, if you click the join button, you'll get access to all of my setups. I've actually uploaded them for every single track now, the ones that I've been using online in open lobbies and for league racing practice. Because again, there is quite a bit of difference between the TT and the online when it comes to a setup approach as well, which we will be discussing a little bit in this video. But without further ado, we'll get into it. And a bit of a disclaimer, don't have to agree with everything I say. Some people might have a bit of a different opinion. This is just going by what I have tested, what I have felt in recent years of the F1 game. Sometimes the description will say, if you make this change, this is how the car should react. When you actually go and test it out on track, it actually doesn't give you that effect. Sometimes it actually gives you the opposite effect, which I think with EA and Codemasters you might not be too shocked with. So unfortunately this isn't a sim, it's not completely realistic, otherwise you could get very, very technical. I'm just going to tell you what I believe these changes actually do, how I actually implement these sets of changes, and the effects they have when you go out on track for myself personally. So without further ado, I think let's get into it. So if we are just going to look at kind of a generic competitive setup, so we'll go from the aero to the tire pressures. So I think starting with the aero, keeping it nice and simple, obviously the more aero you add, the more downforce, the more grip to that part of the car you have. So if you have a higher front wing, more front grip you're going to have. Same for the rear as well. However, the more you add, the more drag you're going to create. So the slower you're going to be in a straight line. But I think probably the biggest thing you want to think about is the balance and the distance between these two. So if I had this on 30-20 and I put this on 40-20, yes, I have more front aero, so I'm actually going to have more grip turning into the corners now. But the car is going to be much more unbalanced and much easier to oversteer because the rear doesn't have enough stability with the grip. The wings aren't as close together as they were before, so the back end can lose grip a lot quicker than the front. The rear's going to come round on you and it's going to create a pretty big imbalance. So again, I'll be creating a separate video on how I create setups from TT to the online, but I think for this game you really want to probably be within like a 5 to 10 kind of range between the front wing and the rear wing. So yeah, you could be something like this, up to here, potentially even more. And when it comes to setups, again, this is one thing I will say, there is no such thing as a perfect setup. There is no such thing as a perfect balance. You can't have a setup that gives you the best amount of low speed grip, high speed grip, best in a straight line, best in tire, all those things. A lot of that is down to drivability, experience, and also just your driving style as well. But what I will be saying is that I think there are certain parameters. If you want to be competitive in the top 1%, there are certain parameters you need to be within. So, for example, at Monaco, you're probably going to be between 45, 50 wings for the front and rear. You wouldn't be running 20 and 30. So there's certain parameters you want to be in between. But again, with the aero here, this is probably the most simple part of the setup itself. So the more you add, more downforce. So in a straight line, the lower you go, better straight line speed, but the less grip you have. But on this game, I would say, in the meantime, you probably want to be having this front aero a little bit higher than your rear. But again, click the join button and you get access to all the setups that I've actually tested and custom made for online already on every single track. If you move into transmission, this is quite a component that a lot of people get confused with. When I have coaching sessions with people, I normally ask them to tell me, what do you think this actually does? And I'm going to say 9 times out of 10, most people don't know what it actually really does. And no, I don't really blame them. If they're brand new to the game, the explanations here haven't changed for about 5 years. They're not very simple, I would say, and not really common sense, a lot of jargon in this. So to keep it really, really simple, so you've got the on throttle, obviously that's when you're going on the power, off the throttle, when you're coming off the brakes, not on the pedal inputs at all. Mainly applies a lot more to the low speed corners with the off throttle. But if we start off the on throttle first, so most of the time, you're probably going to be having this on 100%. And the reason why you want this on 100%, when the wheels are fully locked, when you go down on the power, the output is going to be the same to both of those rear wheels. So I think a way to explain this and the way I do this in coaching, imagine if you're on an airplane, there's an engine either side. If you put the thrust down and for takeoff, you want both engines to be working together to give you that best thrust. And if you put it to 100% locked, that is going to give you the best traction potential. That is the reason why people have it quite high. If you do lower it, and I think around China in TT, some drivers have it on about 90%. If you lower it, what happens there is a number of things. So when you lower it, it actually gives you more rotation when you go on the power, because imagine again, if you're having both engines work together at the same time, they're just going to move you completely in a straight line. So the most performance possible, but it can only do one thing. The more unlocked the wheels become, so the more individually they can work by themselves on either side. So if you have a little bit of a wheel spin moment, one side of the car can kind of counter its power output to kind of catch that wheel spin a little bit as well. But again, if you unlock it, bring it down from 100% to 95 to 90, when you go on the power, the left hand side could rotate a little bit faster, a little bit more power to the left hand side. If you're going to right hand corner, that's going to give you more rotation. So sometimes you might see drivers actually do that. So when your tyres are going off in the race as well, sometimes you go from 100% down to 95, 90. Same for the wet as well, with more understeer. Instead of running 100, you want to be lowering that a little bit just to get a little bit more rotation. Doesn't really affect the tyre wear or anything that much. There's more risk with 100, and because it's harder for you to catch a wheel spin moment, because one side can't kind of counterbalance itself to the power. But most of the time, 100% is going to be away. With the off throttle, it's exactly the same. But again, normally this is pretty much on the low side, so you probably don't want to be going above 40% here. I know I've seen a lot of setups where I see something like 50-50 or something crazy like that. Kind of shows to me maybe they haven't played the game for a number of years. But the off throttle here, the lower you go again, so the same applies to the on, but with the off throttle, the lower you go, so you won't want to think of this, the lower you go, the more rotation, more performance you have, but the more instability you can have as well. So especially applies to the off throttle. So if you went from 25 down to 20, when you're coming off the brakes and like a low speed corner, before coming off the brakes or after coming off the brakes and then going on the throttle, one side of the car can rotate much more because now it's more unlocked. That's going to give you more rotation, more performance. However, if you find the car is over rotating when you're coming off the brakes before going on the throttle, you might want to bump this up a bit, and that means both wheels are moving together a little bit more at the same time, similar power, a bit more to each. Whereas if you put this to like 100%, when you come off the brakes, your car is literally just going to understeer completely because both wheels are going to be moving at the same speed at the same time. They're fully locked, and one side can't rotate more quickly than the other. That's going to give you practically no rotation again. So I like to use the airplane analogy. You've got two engines, 100%, they're working both together. Let's go give you arguably maybe the best stability, but then the lower you go, it's going to give you more rotation but a little bit more instability. But with the throttle, you want to keep this on about 100% because going lower, it doesn't really benefit you that much with the rotation. You use other parts of the setup to do that, and that's why I said again, there's no such thing as a perfect setup, and there's many parts of the setup that actually do the same thing, but you might want to be using a different component to achieve that. versus the other. So you want to be maximizing the throttle with your on throttle 100%, but then you want to keep this on the low side because the off throttle really generates a lot of good rotation, and then you can stabilize that through other parts of the setup as well. Suspension geometry, keeping this really simple. You want to keep this all the way to the left. This is something that just gets discovered. Suspension geometry, to keep it really simple, you want to keep this all the way to the left for this game. Unfortunately, I wish you could change this on track to track, and sometimes you might add a little bit of rear camber or a little bit of toe now and again, but it's all the way to the left for this game, so you really don't need to worry about it. This is something that normally gets discovered in the first 1 to 2 days of the game, because on here, really, this is just going to give you the best benefit overall. You could add a little bit of rear camber, a little bit of toe. That can give you more rotation in some scenarios. It's going to give you a little bit better traction. However, most of the time it's going to give you a lot worse tyre wear, and it's going to cause a lot more negatives than it is benefits. So for the best overall against the pros and cons, you want to keep this all the way to the left. It's going to give you the best overall result, the best balance itself. So don't really need to be mucking around with this. It just changes how the angle of the wheels, how much they're pointed out, pointed in, things like that as well. So again, yeah, if you added a bit of rear camber, it might give you a little bit more rear rotation, but then that's going to make you suffer in many other areas as well. So I'm not really going to go into detail on that because there isn't really much benefit to actually adding more versus and having it all the way to the left. So moving into the suspension, this is something I think is probably one of the most important parts of the setup. A lot of people have different opinions on this. This is something I've tested quite extensively in this game. It's been the same for the last 2 to 3 years as well. And again, this could be one of the parts of the setup where the description says one thing, you then go out and test it, it actually gives you a very different result. So again, you really got to think of these setups as kind of an orchestra, a band, where you've got to have a lot of bass in one part, a lot of treble in the other. You've got to really try and complement each other. So you can make one part quite aggressive, but then you've got to stabilize it. If you just made everything aggressive and give you the maximum performance, so it's like if you put on 11 sensitivity for everything you do, yes, it would theoretically give you the best performance potential if you could control it, but then there are points where it is just too much and you just won't be able to handle it, or the game won't be able to handle it, the car won't be able to handle it as well. So those are the kind of things you need to think about. I divide this up into 3 sections. So you've got the front and rear suspension, then you've got the roll bars, and then you've got the front and rear ride height. All of these work in a very, very similar way. I'm going to try and simplify this again as much as you possibly can. So with the suspension, the way that this is set up, where you've got 41 on the front, 1 on the rear, so the firmest on the front, the softest on the rear, this is giving you the most stability possible. They work in absolute opposites. Again, this is my opinion. They work in complete opposites. So if you lowered this, you're going to get more rotation on the front part of the car. If you increase this, you're going to get more rotation on that part of the car. Exactly the same applies for the roll bars as well. However, the way I would describe the differences between the suspension and the roll bar is the suspension is more about the entry into the corner. So as soon as you start turning the wheel into the corner, the suspension is going to come into play there. With the roll bar, this is more about how the weight is distributed throughout the corner. So pretty much during the corner, once you stop turning, start to unwind your wheel, how does that weight shift from one side to the other? And you might have noticed, if you were part of my Discord, you might have seen I used to use inverted wings on last year's game. So say if we did inverted wings here, because the front is lower than the rear, that's actually going to cause a lot more understeer because the balance is kind of shifted a lot more towards the rear. So what I used to do is I used to run quite low on the roll bar. So again, I wanted the car to be very stable going into the corner because it's very easy to over rotate if it's too pointy. But then during the corner, as I'm coming off the brakes, the car would just grip and grip even more. And this was especially good in races where the tyre wear was kicking in, the tyre temperatures. So if you ran more of like a TT setup on last game, so if you ran, maybe a big difference between the wings, might be really good in the quali. And then what a lot of drivers would do, they'd run quite high on the front anti-roll bar whilst having the rear in the maximum. This will give you great stability in the corner. However, the more the tyres wear, the more understeer it creates. You then just can't get any more grip. Whereas if you had this quite low, and then you did the inverted wings, not only will you be faster in a straight line, you're still going to have really good stability going into the corner, but then the car is going to grip up more and more. And because you're traveling at a slower speed in the race, you don't need a super pointy wing to get you into the corners because you're going effectively slower every single lap. So if you put this down to 1, this is going to give you the most rotation possible. So the maximum on the rear is most rotation, the lowest on the front is the maximum rotation. Suspension is more about the entry into the corner. So if you were turning into the corner, so say if you had this to maybe like 30 or something, and you kept the wings at, you know, 30, 20, so there's a big difference between them. If you turned into the corner and all of a sudden you just lose the car, there's a number of things you could do. You could maybe lower this ring if you want, but that's going to sacrifice overall downforce. You could add maybe a little bit more rear aero. That's going to stabilize the rear a bit more, but again, that's going to cost you straight line speed. But if you didn't want to do that, what you could do if it was snapping as you're turning in, just increase this. It's going to stabilize it when you turn into the corner. Whereas if it's okay turning into the corner and you're trail braking, turning more and more, the car really grips up, but then it just over rotates, especially if you're like coming off the brakes. Again, there's a number of things you could do. You could increase the rear aero again, that's always an option, but again, you're going to be losing straight line speed, might affect your ability to turn into corners, because if it's not an issue turning in, then you're going to be sacrificing that part of when you're driving. You could also increase the off throttle to stop the wheels rotating more individually, have them more at the same time. That's going to create a little bit more understeer, a bit more stability, but again, that's going to cost you on performance. So when you go on a fresher tyre with more stability, you then are not going to have as much rotation. So what you could do is that you could just increase this front anti-roll bar. That's going to give you less rotation during the corner. When the weight is shifting, you're unwinding the wheel, coming off the brakes, and that will give you a better balance. And sometimes, again, even though it might not give you as much rotation, if you can push more and you can carry more within speed and you can do it more confidently, this is going to give you more lap time. This is going to give you much, much more potential. So really, that's how they work. They work in opposites to each other. This is on the edge into the corner, this is during the corner, and again, for the front and rear, they work in opposites. So more stability on the front, the higher it goes. More stability for the rear, the lower it goes. And in this game, I think a good sweet spot to really start with would be something like this. If you put this down to maybe here, and 47, or you could even put this up a little bit. That's going to give you a pretty good starting point if your wings are actually quite far apart from the front and the rear. But again, any questions you have, hit me up in the comments or join the Discord. You can direct message me there as well. With the ride height, I think it's very, very simple in this game. I think anything between 20 and 50 is going to be a good sweet spot. The more you increase this, the more stability you have on that part of the car. Same for the rear as well. The lower you go, the more straight line speed you might have. The higher you go, the better it will absorb bumps. So if curbs are a little bit of issue, which they aren't quite as big an issue in this game, which is why you see typically the ride height has actually been lowered quite a bit for this year's game. If you raise them a bit higher, go have more distance between yourself and the track, that's going to make it a little bit better for curbs. Personally, I think 22.47 is a pretty good baseline to work with. It doesn't really affect that time too much. The closer they are together, a little bit more downforce. So the lower you go, the more downforce you have, because it's closer to the track. It's going to really glue itself to the track much more. The higher you go, the less downforce you have, but stability. So basically, the higher you go, the more stability, but less performance you have. And it changes depending on the front and the rear. But again, I think you really want to have maybe 5 to 7 difference between them, 10 and an absolute max. You want to have them fairly close together, quite similar to the wings. That's the way I tend to look at it with that. With the brakes, you pretty much always want to have this on 100%. Only track you might not have this on 100% would be Monaco, because it's very easy to lock up going through there, but you really want to be maximizing the brakes. And with the brake bias, I don't think you really want to be going over 56. If you're going over 56, you've probably got a car that has too much rotation, too aggressive on certain parts of the setup in terms of the wings, in terms of maybe the off diff, things like that as well. So the more you shift towards the rear, you won't be able to brake as late. You'll be not locking the fronts as easily, but you're much more prone to rear locking. So with this as well, a lot of the time, if it's like in a high-speed corner, you don't have to do heavy braking. Shifting it more towards the rear will actually give you more rotation. It will make it change direction much easier. Whereas if you're braking, trail braking, and you're losing the back end, sometimes you might want to increase this. So yeah, it will be more susceptible for front locking with the front tyres, but you'll be able to brake a little bit later, and it's going to be more stable. That's why, again, when your tyres are going off throughout the race, you tend to be a little bit more prone to rear locking. So sometimes during the race, or from a qualifying to a race, I usually increase this by like 1 or 2%, maybe at the end of the stint when the tyres are really cooking, because it doesn't have the grip to control and stabilise the car. So raising it up a bit higher is going to be more understeer, but brake later, more stable. The lower you go, won't be able to brake as late, but you're going to get much more rotation through the trail braking itself. So again, I've got all my setups in the Discord if you want to have fun and try those as well. With the tyre pressures, this is something you're seeing on time trial right now, where it's not quite maximum. I actually did a video recently talking about the tyre pressures. I actually did a bit of an experiment, a bit of a test as well. So you can go over that. You'll be able to see the results. From time trial to the race online, it's going to be very, very different. Simply again, the lower you go, the more rotation you have, the more mechanical grip, so low speed rotation. The higher you go, the less low speed rotation you have, but the more straight line speed you have, it'll be a little bit more stable during the corners itself. I tend to have this on maximum online in this game, because as you saw in that test in that video, there wasn't actually a huge difference between them, but also it keeps the tyres the coolest, gives you the best straight line speed, and it just gives me a really good balance. And again, I'm using other parts of the setup to get my rotation. I'm not relying on this, because if I put this all down to minimum, yes, it would give me the best rotation, but then I would have to maybe increase this by quite a bit. Otherwise, I'm just going to have way too much rotation. So with the pressures, you want to think of this as a balloon. So the higher you go, the more that balloon is inflated, the lesser the balloon is actually on the table itself, so less friction. So it won't give you as good traction, but it will keep the tyres much cooler. There's not enough of the balloon actually on the table itself to cause the friction. So the tyres are going to be much cooler, faster in a straight line, but it's not going to give you as much rotation. But I think online, you probably want to be having this a little bit more on the higher side. If you ran TT pressures online, you're going to be overheating quite easily. Yes, it will feel good in the first 3 laps, but when the tyres go off, you might find you'll be suffering with a little bit of an imbalance issue. But that is kind of my explanation of the setups itself. I know this is probably a little bit of a long video, but I wanted to try and go in depth as I possibly can. You can skip to different sections. Again, any questions you have, go in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them as much as possible. So if you like someone's comment and if you want that answered, that'll make me more inclined to actually answer that. But if you join the Discord, you get access to all my setups. You can speak to me directly on the one-to-one as well. I'm in a lot more depth if you wish. But I really hope that was useful for you. I will be making videos on how I actually go about creating my setups from like a TT to online, and to be as competitive as I possibly can, because again, I think there actually are quite a few differences between them. But that is my explanation video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will catch you very, very soon. Peace.